And today we have Ruth sharing about how to offer and receive feedback. And I want to introduce to the ones that don't know Ruth. As Eva shared, he's a co-author and curator of the Transition Collection on Personal Resilience, Conflict Resilience, and Group Culture and Social Justice, and had been collaborating with the training circle for a while. And we're super happy, Ruth, to be here with you and keep practicing learning together. So speak for you. Good trip for all.
Yay! Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Anaí. And thank you to everyone for inviting me to share with you. And it's nice to see some familiar faces. I see Claudia and I see Zaida, who I've seen before. Et bonjour, Frédéric. Always nice to have some Francophone folks. It's my second language, the French. So I have some ideas about how to move through today. Just to let you know, we're going to be having some time in pairs to have some discussions. I'll do a little presentation, basically going over one of the documents about offering and receiving feedbacks and ideas. And then Eva has agreed that we do a little demonstration for you. We'll now have a bio break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about a few more things, how to reframe conflict, and then chat with each other a little bit about what we might do next. Does that sound okay? Fantastic. Alrighty. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to invite you into small groups of 2 so that you can describe an experience that you had in your life about a conflict that had a positive outcome. Now, often it's easy to imagine or to remember an experience that had an outcome that you didn't like, but I'm wondering about sharing an experience that had a positive outcome, something that changed for the better. Welcome back. Let's see some smiles. That's nice. I hope that was connective and that folks get to know a little bit more about each other. Oh, Frédéric.
Yes, only to share one word.
Okay.
We had some difficulties to find situations. We took time, and the conflict we found, the solution was more the separation of people from the group, and we didn't know if it was a good or a bad thing. Sometimes it seems to be good. Sometimes it was too early, maybe in the process, but we didn't have any example of real conflict resolution process.
Yeah, that can be quite common. So yeah, we most often hear stories about conflicts that do not go well. This is something that I was speaking about in our small group. And it can be more challenging to remember times when it did go well. And it was interesting. It took a little moment to be like, oh yeah, there are a couple of times when it went well. And I think that's the bigger context of trying to transition really into this possibility that what if conflicts could end up going well? What if that was just even possible? So and that's the invitation of this series, and we'll come back to that a little bit later, is how that might look and what sorts of attitudes we might start to embody if that were true. Alrighty, so as part of that, I was going to say a little bit about offering and receiving feedback. So Eva, if you could bring up those slides, that would be helpful. We're going to share a couple of screens, and I'm basically going down a document that I helped put together, which is based on Seeds for Change, which is a great organization that has a bunch of Creative Commons documents. So these are not my ideas. These ideas come from a wider community, and all I have done is collect them and hopefully put them in a way that helps. All right, so I'm just getting myself oriented here. Eva, can we have the next slide? Great, so we're talking about reframing conflict. And again, this is a taster for the wider series that's coming, but most folks start out seeing conflicts as a problem. And the idea is, what if they could be seen as opportunities? Ideally, an opportunity for connection. Because a conflict arises most often when two people care and have a lot of strong emotions about whatever the topic is. And because they care so much, that's why they get involved in the conflict. And I was brought up in a society and a culture where that was viewed most often as a problem. And as I've gotten older, I've come to realize, like, maybe I could shift that. Maybe I could transition that attitude, that posture, into more of an opportunity. Part of that was seeing a lot of examples of conflicts being destructive. My parents, for instance, would argue a lot using their words. They would occasionally get physically violent. And so I grew up being really scared of any time people would argue or raise their voices even. I still, sometimes when somebody shouts at me, I kind of have this fear response of like, oh, I'm not safe. Partly because I think that something destructive is about to happen, because that was part of what happened when I was younger. And so again, it's this idea, this possibility that what if instead it was something productive? And I like to give the example of my mother's family is Jewish and originally from Eastern Europe, and came from a culture where everybody talked all the time and there was a lot of shouting, and it was hard to hear one thing happening at any time when everyone got together. It was a large family. There was, I think, 8 siblings. So I have all these aunties and cousins. And it seemed like a lot of the time they would, for instance, we just had to decide what kind of pizza to get. And there would be a whole discussion and conflict about what kind of pizza. This is a silly example. But eventually, through a lot of argument and a lot of loud talking, we would decide what kind of pizza to get. And the pizza would arrive. And I think through that, some kind of relationship was reaffirmed. And so I learned a little subconsciously that even when people argue, even when there's conflict, something productive can come out of it, is the idea. And this word regenerative, I just want to put in there as well, because this is leaving things better than the way that we found them. This is how I like to interpret this word. To ameliorate is a good word that I use sometimes, which translates well into other languages. And to think about how conflict could actually be part of a more regenerative culture, how conflicts could actually help us to connect more rather than to increase separation. Those are just some thoughts and questions about the series. Are you waving at me, Anai? Oh, you're just waving. Okay, you're saying like that's cool. All right, Eva, let's try the next slide. Let's see what's on there.
Sorry, it's not letting me.
It's annoying.
Nope, it's frozen. Hang on a minute.
Okay.
Might have to come out of sharing and start
That's
again.
fine. I think it says something about what is feedback, and so I can just start with that.
Okay, yeah, I'll fiddle with this. You
fiddle with that. I'll keep talking. And the first thing I like to say in this is that feedback is natural. Feedback shows up in nature in all sorts of ways. So feedback is not something unusual. Feedback is really common. So it's a form of communication that many organisms use basically to convey information. And the shift that I'm encouraging is that we can see feedback as something that will ideally help everyone make changes that are desirable, or outcomes that are improved. So there's a thing called regulation. Some of you might have heard of this. And feedback is an important part of regulation, right? We only know to stop a behavior if some information comes along and says like, hey, it's time to stop that behavior. Or what's another example? Like falling asleep at the end of the day. The sun goes down and people get tired because the sun goes down and the day's over, and we're diurnal creatures, you know. So that's a kind of feedback. And often feedback can be seen as like asking for an adjustment to be made. Like, hey, we've been doing things a certain way. What if we tried doing things a different way? And you can see how this relates to transition quite a bit, because I think transitioners, one of their goals is to suggest, what if we tried doing things a different way? And giving some feedback about how that might be helpful. So some other things about feedback is that feedback is ideally neutral. It's not positive or negative. It's coming from a really clear place. And so that can be a little bit tricky, because very often, you know, my first response is I get quite emotional, and I want to, you know, I have some anger or some sadness in me, and that can be part of my initial response. But ideally, my feedback can be a little bit more neutral. I can pause before giving feedback, and we'll get to that, and kind of calm myself down and kind of discover what it is that's actually important for me to communicate. Feedback is ideally brief, so it's not a huge process. It's not like, oh, it's going to take us a half an hour for me to tell you everything that I need to tell you. It's more just, hey, we can just do this in a short amount of time, and then we can get on with the rest of our day. There's other processes that I recommend when there are more emotions involved and more deeper psychological issues involved, and I call those clearings. And those are a different process than offering and receiving feedback, and that's another thing that I recommend, but I think separating those out can be helpful for groups. And another thing that feedback typically does is it has the best interests of everyone at heart. And so we're thinking like, I want to give you this feedback because I think it'll help you improve what you're doing, or it'll help the group that we're both connected to improve what we're trying to do, or that we can do things in a way that might make things smoother in whatever way. All right, Eva, can we move to the next one? Hey, it's working now. Fantastic. All right, so in this document, we focus on 3 basic types of feedback. Of course, there's many more, but these are common ones that come up in groups quite a bit. And the 2 on the right there are the ones that we recommend groups try to encourage. And so appreciative feedback is the lovely kind, when you're saying, I really liked how you did that, or thank you so much for bringing cake, or, you know, like, I really love that you were on time. It's like appreciative feedback is a positive note of saying like, wow, that went really well. These are some things that we would like to continue, or these are some things that we would like to underline and emphasize so that they keep happening. And the nice thing about that is, like, whenever you give someone positive feedback, they tend to want to give positive feedback themselves. There's sort of a circle that starts happening. It's almost like a virtuous circle. So appreciative feedback is one of these secret little hacks that we recommend to groups a lot of the time. It's like, well, start by being appreciative of each other and then see what happens. So the other 2 kinds, constructive and unconstructive, have to do with specifics and details. So unconstructive feedback tends to be vague or unclear, or it leaves some uncertainty. It could also be really personal and just be someone's opinion. It might not actually be true. It might have some generalizations in it that are hard to kind of sift through. So just raise your hand if you've ever received feedback like that. I think most people have received feedback like that, and it's usually not helpful. It's usually just like, what do I do with that? I get that you want something to change, but I don't understand exactly what. So constructive feedback is, there's a little set of tools there. It basically is the opposite of that. It gives you a sense of what specific things could be changed. what specifically would be more helpful? What support would be needed in order for some sort of shift to occur, right? So constructive feedback actually has that specificity in it and points to a potential solution to a problem, if we're thinking of things of being still having problems. All right, Eva, how's our next slide? Is that possible? Yes, some examples of feedback. Okay. So again, these are each short and clear. So when you send me really long written messages, I sometimes feel overwhelmed. It would help me if you could send me shorter messages. Really specific, really clear. Here's the change I'd like, you know? When you excitedly interrupt during meetings, I find it harder to keep track of the conversation. Would you consider writing yourself a note and waiting your turn? You know, so again, these are common things that probably have happened in a group you've been in. Or when you give me a week's notice for a deadline, I feel frustrated. This has happened to me a lot. If I would prefer to have 2 weeks notice, that would feel much better. So there's some focus here on the feelings because I've done some nonviolent communication, some compassionate communication training, and I'm mixing in some requests here. So you'll notice that like those sorts of things can overlap. But again, like there's a lot of I statements in here. There's a lot of focus on a very specific behavior change, and there's not a lot of emotion. It's more just like, I find this problematic. Would you consider changing it? That would be better for me. You know, very, very, very basic forms of feedback. All right, Eva, let's move on to the next slide. Oh yes, okay, so this is this whole before authoring. So this is where some of these inner transition techniques come in handy. There's a number of recommendations here about taking some time before you offer feedback. So pausing in general can be helpful. It depends on your personality. So some folks hold everything in, and so pausing is not always helpful. And some folks blurt everything out really quickly, and so this is more for them. So if you're a person who tends to react very quickly and have a very fast and rapid response time, then this is the proposed pause to check your intention. Like, why are you offering this feedback? Is it actually constructive? Is it actually helpful? Does it have the best interests of the other person in mind? Or is it simply about me feeling better, that I just want to blurt it out? So intention is important. Maybe do some personal reflection, maybe do some recentering. There's a couple of other documents about in the personal resilience selection about how there's a number of ways that we can kind of come back to our center if we've become triggered. And so that's about checking in with the emotions. It's like, am I triggered? Is there something tangled or twisted or painful that's coming from inside? And what are my needs related to this feedback? Like, is the first thing I'm going to ask for actually what I want to ask for the most? So like, what am I asking for in this feedback? And how does it relate to my emotions and my needs, which is the next thing there, yeah? And so the thing here is that if your motivation to offer feedback is based on a challenging emotion or an unmet need, you're probably holding what's called a charge. And anytime you offer feedback with a charge, it's unlikely to be very clean or clear or helpful in general. So again, there are times, for instance, like during a clearing session, if you asked specifically to have time to work through some of those more difficult emotions and to explain in detail more of your needs, it's good to ask for that time if that's what you need. But if what you simply need is something to communicate something quickly, usually you can separate some emotion from it, and it's more likely to be received well in that case. The other thing that we mentioned is from the etiquettes. You might have remembered I did a little bit on etiquette for the promotion for this session. And that's about like what we call knocking on the door. Is this a good time? Or I'd like to find a time to just give you a little piece of feedback. It'll take 10 minutes. It shouldn't be that long. And then being willing to have a negotiation about like, if now isn't the best time, like when would be a good time? And similarly, a good setting. There's so many times when someone has just given me feedback publicly in front of a group, and that has made me feel worse in various ways, or made me feel defensive in various ways. And so generally making someone feel defensive is not a good way to get your feedback received. Generally, you want to kind of avoid making people defensive when you're trying to offer them feedback. So finding a good setting and being aware that maybe this setting that we're in right now is not the most agreeable setting, and we could find a better one. You could even suggest, like I've said to colleagues, let's just meet outside in 10 minutes and we'll find somewhere quiet to sit and we can just have a short chat, and it shouldn't take that long. Okay, let's try the next slide. Offering. Okay, so now we're getting into some of the nitty-gritty. So there's a couple of slides on offering. So recommend starting out with the positive. So even though it might feel like a struggle, whenever you start with some appreciative feedback, this increases some trust, it increases receptivity, it can minimize that defensiveness. So again, starting out with like, hey, even just thanks for taking the time to chat with me. It can be really short. Being honest. So don't say that was great if you're thinking that was awful. like we want to increase honesty and authenticity in our interactions. And so being honest about your feedback is a good way to increase trust all around with everyone. There's that specificity again. So be really specific rather than saying that was brilliant, or again, that was awful. You could say something like, I really liked how much you prepared your talk, and I could tell that you put a lot of time into it. However, I found it hard to take in so much data in such a short time. And so it's an example of kind of giving both, like both of those things are true in that case. Another example is to speak from your own perspective. So this is those I statements again, or taking responsibility, and avoiding making universal judgments, like you always do this or you never do that. Those are seldom helpful. And again, making clear requests. That's another part of this, is saying like, this is the specific thing I'd like to change. And then make sure that those requests are directly linked to the information you conveyed in your feedback. It's not just coming from somewhere else. Yeah. Okay, yeah, because you're trying to convey information. Fantastic. Let's try the next slide, Eva. Right, so things to avoid include what we call universalizing or generalizing. Everyone does this, or no one does that. That's it's a way to kind of slip into shaming and blaming, or criticizing or attacking. So again, you want to focus on what specifically they did, not who they are as a person. So that's a nice thing to separate out. It's kind of like, I'm asking for this behavior to change. I don't have a problem with who you are. And again, it helps you be prepared for defensiveness, because it's really common for folks to get defensive whenever any kind of change is suggested. And one way, again, to prepare for that is to imagine how your words might be received. This comes from a lovely tradition. Yeah, just being considerate of how they might land on the person. Are they going to be heavy? Are they going to be sticky? If I was them, like, what do I know about this person that would help me empathize or have compassion? And that you might even mix that into some of the feedback as well. But just sort of to think about how your words might land. All right, Eva, what's on the next slide? Okay, so moving to some tidbits on receiving feedback. So being curious, increasing curiosity this is again one of those transition things where I used to be afraid all the time of interacting, or, someone was going to say something really unpleasant to me. And my internal shift is like, how can I shift that fear to more of a place of curiosity? How can I get curious? I had a dance teacher once who said, replace ambition with curiosity. And I just love striving to do that in every aspect of my life. So that's just one of my own personal inner transitions. But I think it's related to receiving as well. Many of us come from a background where feedback was generally unpleasant, or it was delivered in a way that was unkind. And so I can have that I can feel my shoulders kind of go up and kind of start getting defensive, but like that relaxing into like, okay, what's going on here? Maybe they really do have my best interests at heart. I wonder what it is they have to say. Respecting the offer is just recognizing that sometimes it takes a lot of courage for someone to offer you feedback, right? So it might be an opportunity to learn or grow or deepen. And it might be that it's just helpful for that person. It might not have anything to do with them or with me. It might have more to do with them. I'm thinking of a specific example. I'm not sure whether to share it, but there was one time when like I had no clue that I had offended someone. And it wasn't until much later that they came up to me and offered me feedback. And I was like, wait, what? I'm getting feedback? What did I do? I got all defensive. And it turned out that it was just like a really simple thing. Like I had just kind of, my facial expression had expressed like dismay or surprise, and they had perceived that in a certain way, and I didn't know that they perceived things that way. And it was just, it helped our relationship to become more connected. So there can be some surprises there. Anyway, so listening to the feedback, of course, is one thing. And hear the positive as well as the negative. Like, so sometimes if you're expecting the negative, it's easy to tune out, like, oh wait, they just appreciated what I had done. Like the appreciative feedback sometimes can be overlooked. But yeah, remember to listen to all of the feedback. And it's okay to ask questions if you're unclear or if you want more details, and then use active listening, that things are like, so I think what you said was this, is that what you said? And then you can check and make sure that, okay, that's actually what they said. Try not to take things too personally, and notice if you're becoming defensive. So try to stay in the present rather than reacting based on past habits or past expectations. This is, again, that's a lifetime of work right there. Anybody who's done any kind of meditation or studied Buddhism is all about like coming back to the present moment. Whew, what a challenge that can be. So I'm not saying this flippantly or glibly. I'm just saying like these are some techniques that seem to help with the receiving of feedback, but they can be pretty deep. What else do we have on here? Reflect. Yeah. Sometimes you might ask for a little extra time or space to reflect. So there's you get a chance to actually consider what they've said. So sometimes you're going to say like, okay, thanks for the feedback. I'm going to think about that for however long. I'm going to think about that for a day or a couple of days or whatever. And I'll get back to you. And just, so then like, do get back to them. If you do take some time to reflect, like don't just leave them hanging. And it's nice etiquette to just thank folks to kind of close the session and be like, okay, I have heard you. Thank you for, especially if they were expressing some courage, like really give them a good sense of like, okay, I can see that that might have been a little bit challenging for you. So thank you. Message received. What's on the next slide there, Eva? Yeah, I'm just catching up here. Yeah. And see, it can be tricky. Yeah, there can be some feelings of difficulty. No problem. All right, so considering the feedback. So this is, again, part of receiving the feedback. If you've gone away and you're taking a little time, again, be curious, because maybe there's something in here that will be helpful or beneficial. Ideally, this person is on your team and they're hoping for the best for you. So maybe this feedback will actually help you move in a way or shift in a way that will make your life better in some way. At the same time, you don't need to accept all parts of the feedback as absolutely true. So you can discern maybe some parts feel true and some parts feel, I don't think that's true for me. So it's possible to kind of take some of the feedback apart and to be like, yeah, okay, I accept this part, and nah, I'm not so sure about that part. Yeah. And you can notice your reactions, how you feel about those various parts. Again, if I become defensive, maybe there's something sensitive or tender inside, and it might do me some good to look at that my own self. Sometimes, like, I can feel my body clenching or having a certain kind of reaction. That's also good information for me to learn. It's like, huh, I'm thinking about this idea. I'm noticing my body is changing. It's just lovely to have compassion for yourself and for the other person. That's just a great thing to try to transition toward, and to ask for help, to seek support if you need it. Sometimes it can be really challenging to receive some feedback and integrate it, especially if what someone has said really contradicts my own view of myself. And I thought, like, wait, I thought I didn't do that, but now they're telling me that I'm doing that. Yeah. And so sometimes it can be helpful to talk to somebody who maybe has known me for a long time and say, like, hey, have you noticed this? Should I be thinking about this? Should I consider this more deeply? And sometimes a good friend or family member can give you that insight and say, like, well, actually, yeah, I think so. They might say that, or be like, no, I don't know why they said that about you. It doesn't seem true to me at all. So they can help you with the discerning. All right, what's on the next slide there, Eva? Oh, a little summary. Okay, so yeah, basically, have patience. And it's okay if you don't get it right the first time. Usually these sorts of things take practice. So give yourself a break and give other members on your team a break, or maybe make a decision together, like, hey, we're going to try practicing this together. That's a way to spread more kindness and compassion for yourself and for everyone else. And just remember, sometimes folks are doing their best, and that can look a little different depending on their background or their context. It's nice to emphasize that we could be learning this together. Here in this co-housing, we now have like a study group that needs to sort of practice these things. And we recognize, like, yeah, we're at varying levels with this. And some of us, it's easier. And for some of us, it's more challenging. That's okay. And try to remember that feedback ultimately is trying to strengthen those relationships, to strengthen those connections, so that we can understand each other better. And in the future, our interactions can be smoother and more enjoyable. All right, what's on the next slide there, Eva? All right, okay, so these are some links to the conflict resilience collection. That is an actual link. So if you get this selection of slides, you might have the link there as well. And there's two in particular I recommend. The one on feedback culture, which is trying to create more of a sense of, like, oh, we're actually going to experiment with this in our group. And a lovely one on sharing and celebrating failings. I chuckle about that because failing is, again, one of these things where there's all these expectations. Oh, we need to hide the ways that we fail, or oh, that's considered bad or wrong. And I've been in a number of groups that have really uplifted those and said, like, well, what if they were just normal? What if it was just something that everybody did? We just tried things, and sometimes they worked, and sometimes they didn't. So we're going to adjust them and see if we can make them better. There's a couple other cultures. The group culture collection is coming along. There's a particular one called Transition and Group Culture. I'm not sure if it's ready yet, but there's a good draft of it that's hanging around somewhere. And of course, Eva and Anaï are going to be involved in this whole series on reframing conflict. All right, yeah, so Anaï is reminding us that we're going to share all those links with everyone so they can get them. I think there's only one more slide, right, Eva? Yeah. This is not really mine to talk about, but there's a whole campaign of doing, learning from how each other has done amazing things. So check it out. You too can practice more transition. All right, I think that's it for my presentation. And we're going to do a little demo before we have a break. We're going to have a break at the top of the hour. Or what do we, I took a little more time with that. Let's do a little demonstration now. Eva, give me some feedback.
What on?
I don't know, something.
Um.
Fine, I'll give you some feedback. How about that?
Okay.
I'll give you some
Okay.
appreciative. I'll give you some appreciative feedback. It's a nice,
Oh,
always nice to start with that.
Yeah.
It's always nice, isn't it? So
Yeah.
Eva, first of all, thanks for inviting me to come do this. You know, usually it's just me sitting around on my lonesome writing these documents, and this is so much more fun. There's actual people who are interested. And thanks for supporting me and being willing to be my partner. And thanks for doing all of the tech behind the scenes there. That was great. That meant I didn't have to do it and I could really focus on what I was saying. So I appreciate that because I've been the tech guy for other people and I can understand what you were doing. And I really noticed how when it didn't work, you didn't get too flustered and you figured out how to make it work. I love that.
Thank you. That's very nice feedback.
Appreciative feedback.
Mm.
I know, and then you just kind of get all squishy and googly.
Yeah, now you can hit me with the bad stuff.
Right. Well, okay, so here's one thing. I didn't know where we were meeting today. Nobody emailed me a Zoom link. So next time we do this, could you email me the Zoom link ahead of time so that I know where to go?
Yeah,
that would be helpful for me.
I get that. I thought that we'd shared this doc with you, but we obviously didn't, or if we did, we didn't flag up that it also had the Zoom link on it. But yeah.
Just
sorry that happened.
More sharing in general would be helpful. So you know, simple, right? It's not emotional. Yeah. It'll just help me show up better. You want to give me any feedback?
Yeah, well, so yes, not being an expert feedbacker, some appreciative feedback would be thank you for that talk and for all the resources that are there on the Transition Network website as part of this project. We went in there and looked at them all, and there's loads of them have got Root's name on, and it's a huge amount of work that's gone into creating all of those. And I don't think it gets seen very much, which was one of the reasons we wanted to show it and create illustrations and things. But yeah, loads of appreciation for all of that largely unseen work. I think it's really useful. And I also felt, as you were taking us through this presentation, just how you know, I might not have gone and read this in a document, but you being here and taking us through it means that I'm engaging with it more and more easily. And that could be a thought, I guess, possibly for the future, when some of us have time and resource to do it, to actually do that for all of the documents, because I think we're all different. For some people, like my son, for instance, takes stuff in through reading, but for me, it's much more when someone's speaking. So that's some appreciative feedback. Some more challenging feedback might be, and I don't know how much this was just for me, but because I was sharing my screen, I couldn't see anybody, including you. And I did find myself disengaging as well. So I was kind of like, I liked what you were saying. And then it felt like quite a lot sometimes, because yeah, you were going through, you know, just one bullet point, but there was a lot in each one. And I wasn't seeing a face of somebody kind of like keeping me connected with. So I did a little bit of zoning in and out. So that may have been particularly my situation, because I imagine that everybody else was able to have a panel with faces, humans, which is always helpful.
I like that
Yeah.
feedback. I think a way that I could suggest improving that would be I could do the slides next time, and then then my face usually shows up in the top and you can watch my face, right? So do your own freaking slides. Sorry.
Yeah. Good.
Thanks,
Enough.
Eva. Yeah, so that was a little demo of actually live feedback occurring right in front of you. We didn't plan that, but it took us right up to the top of the hour. So we get a little bio break. When are we coming back? 5 minutes?
Yeah, there was just 5 minutes planned for
Okay.
this next bit, and we're slightly late, so I think it would be good to keep to that.
Let's have a 5-minute bio break and come back. Bios. Oh, thanks for smiling. It's nice. All right, so we have a few more interactive things planned. And we're gonna put you all in breakout groups to talk to each other again. Would you believe it? So before that, I have to sort of give you the framing. So last time it was about a simple an example of a conflict that had a positive outcome. This time, it's an opportunity to think about how would you redo a conflict. I remember when I was in a workshop where this was offered. I had so many things I could choose from. So this is, okay, let me set this up. I am a certain age now, and I was younger. And when I was younger, I was less skilled. I'll just put it that way. Maybe the same was true for you. Maybe when you were younger, you had some interactions that would have gone differently if you had as many skills as you do now. Maybe. And so this is an opportunity to think back a little and to imagine a conflict that you were part of. I guess it could be one that you witnessed, but it's more powerful if it's one that you were part of. And to think, how could that have gone differently? What if I could wave a magic wand and go back in time, knowing what I know now and having the skills that I have now, how would I redo that? What if I had a do-over? Is sort of the idea. Okay, Claudia's nodding. You've done a similar exercise, I can imagine. And so the idea here is that it's the opportunity to reframe the conflict. So again, this series is about reframing conflicts in all kinds of ways. And so I think, or at least for me anyway, what helps me is practice in doing that. So it can be imaginary. So for instance, I write a lot of fiction and I have to imagine the conflicts between my characters. What are they so arguing about? What are they so, excited about? But you all probably work with groups where you don't even have to imagine conflicts. You probably have like real life examples that you can think of, because they're pretty common. Conflict happens a lot. And it seems like it's just a natural part of life. Anyway, so some conflicts are small, and that's what we've been focusing on today. And some conflicts are large. Like, I don't think we want to get into any large examples today, but if you could pick a medium-sized conflict, so not something that's like, the core struggle of your life, or not something that's about, international, borders, not something that's very large, but something that's like medium size, maybe something that affected a group that you were part of, or something that was maybe not family, depending on your family, but a lot of conflicts in families have a lot of emotions and a lot of background associated with them. So those might be a little like getting toward that bigger category. So maybe those are not medium size. But maybe stuff with like a work colleague, that might be a medium-sized conflict, or stuff with a teacher at a school. There's often some good conflicts there, right? Oh man, just as soon as I said that, I was like, yeah, I have a few of those I'd like to redo. Oh, I am so disappointed in so many of my teachers. Anyway, so that's the invitation. So we'll go into breakout rooms for how long? For 20 minutes? Does that sound right? So kind of 10 minutes each to kind of think through, like, okay, you have to explain like what was the original conflict and then how would you redo it. So that takes a little bit of time. So ideally, each of you can have a chance to think about what was a medium-sized conflict that you would possibly redo. Yeah? Okay, welcome back. Hope that was helpful or generative or yeah, evocative, transformative, maybe. I don't know. What happened? I'm curious. Tell me all about it. Thanks for laughing at my silly jokes. First of all, just a little quick apology to Juliet or Juliet. I don't even know how to pronounce your name. So that I saw
yes,
this.
that's perfect.
I saw the spelling and I assumed, silly me, that you might be a francophone.
No, it's okay. It's the same. I'm used to both languages. So Juliet is kind of international, just with a Frenchy touch to it. So it's fine.
Ça va. Okay.
Ça va.
Well, hey, since I've got you chatting, how did you find your time in the group, in the breakout room?
It was interesting because the conflict I talked about happened a while ago. I often think about it. And this conversation allowed me to set in the conversation a probability, not thinking about an option I had not considered possible before. I still don't know if it's possible or if it makes sense, which was the conclusion of our conversation. But it created a space where I considered it, which I usually which is part of changing how I deal when I have conflicts.
Right.
Took a totally different route, which is in line with the change I'm going through right now and just exploring.
Would you say it's like the difference between a door being closed or a door being open?
A new door opening, or me accepting to step into that door that might have been open forever, but not the one I usually take.
Okay. Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for the exercise. It creates space.
Excellent. So does anybody else like to share with the group how that went?
I can share a bit. It was interesting to see that this is a hot topic, even us that we are working with communities and we are dealing with this topic all the time, and even in principle teaching others how to approach in case of conflict, etc. In our own groups, we still face the same difficulties, and we still, commit old mistakes, etc. Yeah, so it's very interesting to observe how difficult it is, and also it was interesting to see that we many times the way we try to deal with conflict in our group is avoiding it, I think, and which is also not a good strategy, avoiding conflicts. But we do that unconsciously. But when we realize we have a conflict because for so long we've been avoiding saying what needs to be said.
That's very common. I mean, I've done that. I've had to learn as I've gotten older to have more courage about that. Has that been true for you too? Yeah.
Can I say something about the courage?
Yeah.
Because in the instance we talked through, I have taken the stance of courage. And the door I've seen is the one to walk out. So I don't know.
Yeah. It can be courageous to do either thing. Yeah.
What is interesting, and when Claudia was talking and she said how difficult it is, yes, in the moment, very often when we get into conflict, it's because we go to the edge of our possibilities in one way or another, and we are clueless or we feel powerless. And it's like this thing of the survivor inside takes the front seat and does the work. And it's a rapport of force. I don't know if this is an English expression. And we know that it's violence and it creates only more violence. So we are in an alchemy of our being, how to step up to the next level of how to be present. So indeed, conflicts are kind of unavoidable, and maybe it's how we alchemize them afterwards, or how we distillate
Mm.
this that gives us the wisdom and the lessons. And maybe there will be other opportunities later on that will benefit from the inner search we've done before. I do not know, because voilà. So courage, there is also wisdom and other virtues that can take place, and it's always different, I think.
Yeah,
That was my comment about courage.
great. Yeah, I can tell you've been thinking about this for some time.
Yeah, I don't like a battle. I like new beginnings after storms.
Mm.
Uh,
Would anyone else like to share? Frédéric.
Thank you. I shared that I don't have a lot of conflict situations in my experience, and making me think that in my personality or in my way of living in group, I tend to avoid conflict, maybe too much. Maybe it's an idea after this feedback, and when I guess that if I don't dare to give feedback, sometimes I don't dare to give feedback. It's a way of avoiding a conflict. I fear to get in a conflict, so that's why I'm here today. Also because I want to improve my way of giving feedback without without fearing to generate a conflict systematically. And so to respect me and to respect the group and the people also to improve. That's what I wanted to share.
That makes me think of like 7 different things that I could talk about. Oh, well, thank you for coming along and working to your comfort zone. Do you know this expression? Beyond the comfort zone is the learning zone. It's a little riskier out there.
But now we have another word. It's the conflict zone.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We can go in the conflict zone.
Sure.
To learn.
That usually means something different, but yeah. And beyond that, I'll say is the panic zone. And in the panic zone, learning does not happen. So you don't want to go too far.
And after the panic zone, it's a flow zone, but not always.
Yeah, we hope. This is from Tom Sennheiser, his theory of learning. But yeah, I think a lot of folks avoid conflict, and a lot of folks, again, would benefit from regular structures. So, for example, at the end of a meeting, one of the things that we do here with Sociocracy is we give a little feedback. How did the meeting go? And we often will talk to the facilitator and say, I liked when you did this, or I thought this was a little sloppy, or I think you should change this next time. And we just get into the habit of doing it after every meeting. And then it just starts to become normalized. You know this expression, normaliser? Yeah. And I think that's a form of transition right there, is starting to say like, hey, what could we do differently that we could start to normalize? That's an example. Okay, we have a little bit more time. We could hear from one other person, I think, and then we've got a few more things to talk about on the thing. Anaí.
I can share. It's a hot topic, and also a lot like comes up. And one of the things we were sharing in the breakout room is how many times to kind of care to each other, we don't say the not so nice things. And then with time, like without the feedback loops to the system, is super dangerous because the system needs to regulate itself to move towards life. And if we get stuck, we can move towards death as a system. So yeah, we could see that it's a cultural thing. Like Western mind didn't teach us how to say these kind of things without reaction. So I believe it's an important learning for everyone to keep practicing. And another thing that came out for me is that when I open to give and receive feedback, I feel vulnerable, and not always is received in an open space, but sometimes it's like a reaction and defensive that comes back super strong, and it hurts 3 times more. And I wanted to ask if you have something to say in that, because it's like my system wants to open, but automatically wants also to close. And I think we all experience this, and that is why we don't go to the conflict zone and out of the conflict into the learning zone. And
Sure.
yeah. Mhm.
Well, okay, you asked me to respond. I'll respond to first. A lovely idea that I recommend is little and often. So the idea of feedback, I think, is that you give a little bit all the time so that it doesn't build up and you have that explosion of the volcano. So like this used to happen in my family where, like, you know, one of my parents would explode at a certain point because they had been keeping all of this feedback inside for some time, you know. And so the idea is that it has to go somewhere. It's just energy, it needs to move. So you can either have it come out in these little amounts or in a very large amount, and the large amounts can be I don't know, more scary, more dangerous, perhaps destructive. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention comes from the Haudenosaunee people, who I have great admiration for. I'm not Haudenosaunee, but they live in the land where I was born, and I've been learning some of what they say. And they have this description of making your skin thick. You know this expression? Having a thick skin? So the idea is that your heart is very tender at the center of where you are, and you want to have a couple of layers of skin in between your heart and the rest of the world, so that if someone's words come toward you like an arrow, and they're sharp and they're pointy and they might hurt the tender center of who you are, the skin is thick enough that it catches the arrow and it doesn't hurt quite so much. So this is a thing that I like, this image and this idea, and I'm not very good at it myself, but I pass it along in case it's helpful. And it comes up in other ways too, other ideas of having just ways to protect oneself from harm and ways to protect oneself from people's words. That's part of how I take care of my own self and help to regulate my own nervous system, you know, and to make sure that yeah, like for me, it's like going outside or going for a walk or completing the stress response or whatever the thing is that works for me. Those are all helpful things. But in general, like, it's more just getting used to it and having more time and being like, oh, right, someone is having an emotional reaction in my direction. And then I can choose how I'm going to respond more and more often. That's the point where I'd like to be. And I think that's the culture we're all trying to move toward, as a guess. Thank you. A chance to talk about that. Oh, more from Frederic. Yes, we have a little.
Yes, it's a question.
Yeah, we're in the question moment.
Do we have to ask before offering feedback systematically?
I think it's nice. It can be really quick. So sometimes I don't ask. Sometimes I tell, but then ask. So I'll say like, hey, I want to give you some feedback. When's a good time? So that's kind of asking and kind of not. It's so, but yeah, you can, in your groups, you can experiment with what ways work for more people. So, you know, I live with British people, and that doesn't work very well because British people are a little bit more, they have more thick skin than I do, actually, generally speaking. But when I'm among like Canadian people or US people or even some like Italian people or Greek people, it's like it'll change depending on which culture I'm among, right? Anai's nodding. You're like, okay, you've experienced this too. So yeah, sometimes it's important to really ask like, and I guess it depends on the person too. So if you know that a person is particularly sensitive, like for instance, I have a neighbor whose daughter just committed suicide, right? And so if I want to give her feedback, I want to be aware that her daughter just committed suicide and she might not be in the best place to hear my feedback. You know, so context matters, and being aware of what people are going through is also helpful.
And another similar question, do we have to create in our organization, do we have to create space specific for feedback? For example, every month we have a meeting which is dedicated to feedback or
yeah,
tension resolution.
So again, it's little and often is the recommendation. That can look number of ways. It could be after every meeting. It could be once a day, once a week. I know some groups do once a year, where they do a whole year in review, and they spend some time thinking about, okay, what went well, what could be better, what do we want to do next year, things like that. So there's different rhythms depending on the group and the group size. You know, so like for groups that interact very often, if you're meeting every day, like I would say, yeah, have at least once a week, because stuff's going to come up and you want to have an avenue to channel that energy. Anaí.
Yeah, I have another question that we also commented in the breakout room. That is, I have experienced in some moments when conflict has arisen, and there is a moment that we can ask for mediation. So a third person, including like the circle, can be part to hold a conversation between the parts. I have experienced that sometimes the mediator doesn't have the real skills to to intervene during, and the thing becomes just let's listen each other forever. And many times, instead of solving, the wound gets deeper because we repeat. It's kind of re-traumatizing somehow. We repeat the same thing once and again, and communication just doesn't happen. Sometimes we don't arrive to connect with the other. So I wanted to ask you, like, do you have something to say regarding on this position of the mediator, and when and how to ask for that, and how to train ourselves to be the role of the mediator, maybe something on that line. Mm-hmm.
Wow, big question. I'll do my best. I don't have all the answers. I have ideas. So sorry, Eva. Makes me think of several things. So yeah, I respect mediators as well, and I respect people who practice nonviolent communication. And I've seen some good results when a third person comes in, or someone who's not so involved in whatever the conflict is. So sometimes that can be helpful. If they have more experience and skill, that can be helpful. Can we train each other to do that? I mean, in theory, yes. And it always seems like some people are better for certain situations than others, you know. So here in the co-housing, again, this has come up, is like, can we have more people be facilitators or more people be mediators? and some people are better than others, and sometimes there's this idea that like it should rotate around and everyone should just become as skilled as everyone else, which is fine. And I think I do like the idea of supporting folks to improve. At the same time, I think some folks have more skill, so sometimes there's a situation where it's better to have someone with more skill to come in and to actually help. And so in terms of, you were saying like when the no communication is happening or folks aren't interested in helping each other, I'll again refer to the Haudenosaunee. They have a lovely expression where if the past is present, it's hard to move to the future. So in a situation like that, they would probably stop whatever the negotiation was, or stop trying to do business. And they would shift and say like, okay, a different kind of meeting now needs to happen with these people. There's some kind of emotional process that needs to occur so that one of or the other of them can release some sort of trauma from the past, and that will enable some movement toward the future. Yeah. So the takeaway for there that I recommend groups do is kind of separate meetings for business from meetings for sorting out emotions, if possible. And so we again recommend this process called clearings. That's usually enough. Sometimes a mediator is a good person to invite to a clearing session, and that's just an opportunity for two people to really go more deeply into what the conflict was about, and hopefully to arrive at the needs. This is again, from nonviolent communication, we try to find what are the needs that both people are holding that seem incompatible, but in reality, we want to meet everyone's needs. And so let's find a way. Let's think about what are the strategies we can use to find those needs. That's often what conflicts are about. They're about like the strategy that we're using. It's not about the actual need. Does that help? Okay, we've got a few minutes left. What else needs saying? There's a bunch of things that need saying, right, Eva? Help me remember.
I'm just looking at the program. I mean, it was questions and answers really, and I
Okay.
think that's what we've done.
We did that.
We've got some links to share.
All right, I just put a bunch of them in the chat.
There,
There's
brilliant.
there's a feedback form.
There you
That's
go.
funny. We want your feedback on this experience.
Yeah, we called it the feedback form, or something terribly witty like that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much us, and yeah, we're potentially leaving very slightly elegantly early, unless there's anything else that people would like to share.
Well, let's just mention these upcoming. There's upcoming on 26 April on Interbeing, Day of Transition Practice on 27 April with a whole bunch of sessions, deep listening session, conflict collaboration, collective power. Whoa. With Paul Kawada, I know him. He's great. Practicing Transition website, the ITC website, the Practicing Transition Community Practice, the ITC Community Practice, so many things. Check it out.
Thank you for sharing all that, Ruth, and thank you so much for the presentation and this moment. And thank you all for being here and coming and staying for the breakouts that were deep. And see you soon around in all that.